Hello, everyone. I'm Kayla Matthews, and this is my week 2 discussion on both the journal and the book. And so this is my third time filming this video because Canvas is not cooperating with me tonight, and every time I upload my video, it solely does not show up. So this will be the third time uploading it, so sorry if you guys see a third video on the discussion board. And so to begin, we're going to go over the book, chapters 3 through 5. And so when we're discussing chapter 3, it talks about ethical subjectivism, and essentially just talks about how the moral philosophy or the moral code is just that morality is actually based on perspective. And so what it really talks about is that everything in life really has no right or wrong answer when it comes to morals. And that is decided on individually. And so the first example is gay rights. And so they talk about having a gay rights activist or advocate, and then they have Mike Pence of the Republican Party in Congress. And so objectively, he states, we don't support it, we don't want it. Of course, the advocate thinks it's morally correct. And so basically it's stated how neither of them are wrong. However, they both think they're right, and there's no issue with that. But the issue is that there's nothing to define whether or not there is a right answer. And so basically what it was discussing is how ethical subjectivism is just that when it discusses, ethical situations like this, and in regards to science, which is the next sector, is that there's going to be a lot of opinionated point of views, a lot of opinionated perspectives on how things should be ran. However, it needs to solely be based on objective standards. And so when it talks about science, it talks about how science is factual. Science has hardcore evidence, and science goes through the scientific process in order for it to gain its evident result, essentially. However, whether or not you apply that to how your lifestyle pertains, that is on you. And that is essentially what the book is talking about. Is there's a lot of subjectivism in science, because it's like people don't really obtain to wanting to apply this to how they get treated, things like that. They don't believe in it. And the thing is, that doesn't mean it's wrong. And so it talks about different examples, but the main sector just talks about how science is based on fact. Science is based on fact, and morality is based on perspective and opinion. However, those two seem to directly co-align way more than it should for the purpose of opinion. And that's it. So we go on to chapter 4, and it talks about morality and religion. And so the thing about this chapter is it discusses how ethics is objective and morality is not. So morality is subjective. And when it comes to religion itself is objective if you follow it. But if it's not, it's moral. It's a moral decision that individuals make despite of any religion, not just a certain one in particular, any religion of any sort. So the thing is, that becomes your standard. That becomes anybody's personal standard, especially as a follower of Christ. The book talks about how, as a follower of Christ, you follow God's creed, God's word. You stay away from sinning. You follow these rules in the sort that this is your purpose, and this is how you give back to the Lord, is making sure that you follow his purpose for you. And so, like I said, that is your standard. That is the standard that the book analyzes for an individual, is that if you follow Christianity, these will be your standards. However, if you do not, then those will not apply to you. And the issue that came about in the book is that if you related with Christianity, that is okay, and if you don't, then it's also okay. But it's only an ethical standard if you follow it. So if you don't follow it, it does not apply to you. And so that's where there's a lot of misalignment when it comes to religion and politics, and honestly subjectivism as well, is that opinions will relate to how people should live their lives because that is their standard. However, if you do not follow said religion, that is not your standard. And so that is kind of what the book was talking about. And it also talks about, in relation to Christianity, it talks about the theory of natural law. And so what it talks about is simply everything in nature has a purpose. Excuse me. And so to begin, it actually didn't derive from God's word. So they actually discussed this in the BC area by the Greek. And so they actually were ones to discover that, okay, in this era, everything had a purpose. It was very minimalistic. They didn't have the technology or the medical services that we do today. However, everything that was there provided for them was provided under the name of God. And so what that established was, okay, well, we've established that what we had back then was established by God. So God is now initiated in the saying and the theory of natural law, stating that everything has its purpose under God. And so, like I said before, if you begin that you are not a studied Christian, that would not apply to you. You might think the earth derived in a different sense, which is okay, but the book simply describes that the theory of natural law would apply to Christians because everything on earth back then to now has its purpose under the name of God. And so lastly, chapter 5 talks about ethical and psychological egoism. And so to begin, just to take away, they used the example of, they call it worldwide hunger. And so with this, it's like, how would you, so it's asking the reader, how would you respond to that? If you saw somebody asking for food or money on the side of the road, how would you assist them of some sort? Also, what's your thought process behind it? Like the decision whether you do or don't, it's not correct or incorrect, but why did you make the decision and why was that the decision that you chose to make? And so this is when it has to go to ethical egoism, because it discusses how individuals that may have the resources, have more money, first off have more time, have more food, things along those lines, just basic necessities, they actually tend to steer away and not tend to help others that are in need because they don't want to acclimate or they don't want to experience those situations and things like that. So they actually steer away, oftentimes not giving that money, which bases back to true like egoism. And then it has to do with psychological egoism, solely for the purpose that now it's no longer situational, now it's human nature. Why do you make the decisions that you do on the daily? That is because of your ethics, your morals, your standard, your foundation. That is what you're built off of. And that is exactly what the book discussed. And so now we're going, we're on a little bit of a rush here, but now we're going on to the article, the little journal that was written about the genealogy and basically about the lab theory. And so my takeaways, like observations that I got from the lab theory, is essentially it's very fluid. And so what it discusses is how there's no ultimate moral truth because it sees through multiple lenses. And so what it discusses is how they're trying to decrease the conformity because of how broad the theory is, and they want it to apply to everyone because it does apply to how people create ethical standards and morals for themselves. And so it's basically a create your own moral philosophy standpoint, things along those lines, but it's also like, how do we make it more defined? However, that's the main issue. That's what they're looking for. And so basically it talks about how it is really stumped by the term social constructivism. And so I actually haven't been too familiar with that term, so I had to look it up. So in the book, it just talks about how, life today is built upon social standards, social needs, social cues, social standards. And so it's like, when they're building this theory, they're creating this theory, you cannot fit every population of society into this theory. That is the main issue that is related to this. It's just that everything is based on subjective values. Everything that is in relation to social needs, social constructivism, constructionism, it's just that everything is subjective. There's no right or wrong answer. However, how you create your values, how you present yourself to the world is based on social cues. It's not necessarily that it's wrong or right, but it's just based on what society wants and needs from you. And so it's just talking about how they used a direct line of, I'm going to put this as well, genealogy, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it, because perspective would somewhat go against the fluency of ethics. And this is a little bit difficult for me to understand. It's just because now it's steering away from ethics and now it's steering into morality. And so why I say that is just because this is, to begin with, a super fluid term, the lab theory and what it stands for, and why it's difficult for them to create kind of a standard or foundation of what it actually means. It's just because it's more morality based than it is ethics based. And so ethics kind of, they use the word contradicts. So it contradicts ethics, because, like I said, if you're basing your entire foundation on subjective values, it's no longer ethical. It has to do with morality and opinion. And so basically what they stated was, I created the question of, does it agree with everyone or some? And so that's essentially what it's talking about, is they couldn't create this foundation for it because it has to just do with some populations. It has to do with some people. It can't apply to everyone. And that's not what they're looking for, but they're saying it's so minute that it wouldn't be applicable solely because it's just very small in how it is ran if it was just solely based on ethics. And so they talk about genealogy and the importance of defining individual identities. And so that's why it needs to have that fluency, is just because, you're not defining people based on one definition for the populations that go throughout society. You are wanting to create those values, and so in order to create those values, you have to be fluid in what you're willing to offer. And so that's why in this it discusses how it's building that ethical standard or foundation, which was kind of difficult, which that was their result. They couldn't build that foundation. It's creating greater problem solving skills. However, they were not able to build that foundation for this theory solely because they were unable to come to a consensus of, it's essentially a fight between ethics versus morality. But thank you.